Hello, lighting people. More and more buildings and their lighting plans are being designed with human wellness as a major consideration. We wanted to get a lighting designer or specifier's perspectives on this growing trend. So we thought it would be a great idea to catch up with the principal of Lam Partners, a prestigious lighting design firm with offices in Boston and Pittsburgh. And Glenn Heinmiller is not only a principal, but he's also an advisor to the International Well Building Institute, which is the organization that oversees the well building standard. Glenn, hello, and thank you for joining us today for 5 big questions.
Hey, Al, thanks for having me.
Great, Glenn. Hey, so the well building standard is something that we hear more and more about. We've seen some projects now that are being built to those standards. We've seen multiple revisions of this standard issued by the International Well Building Institute. For the uninitiated and for those who are just mildly familiar, could you just explain what is the well building standard and why is it important?
Well, fundamentally, it's a tool for advancing health and well-being in buildings. It's a rating system, so you basically achieve points, score points, and you get a certification. But establishes criteria for offices, buildings, other spaces to basically improve the health and wellness through design for the occupants of the building. Well, breaks this down into, I don't know how many categories: air, water, nourishment, movement, sound, materials, community, and light. It's important to the lighting world because we expect that it's going to lighting designers, I think, who are paying attention to this, expect this to gain traction. Well, it's been around for quite a while, but we expect it to get more and more, projects building owners are going to want to pursue well. And so designers and manufacturers in the lighting world need to be prepared to meet the needs of the projects.
So when we look at the well building standard specifically, what role does lighting play in a well building?
Well, there's a whole section for lighting, and there are criteria that basically cover all the factors that contribute, the lighting factors that contribute to wellness. And interestingly, all of these factors are basically lighting quality factors that lighting designers have been addressing and pursuing for over 50 years. And these are things like access to daylight, illuminance levels for task performance, glare control, lighting control, manual control for our comfort and satisfaction, contrast balance or brightness balances, color rendition, flicker, and of course, added to that, as I think most people know anything about well, is lighting for circadian support, which is typically what people think of when they think of lighting in the well building standard, but it's way more than just so-called circadian lighting.
So a lot of those things that you mentioned, requires specialized products or perhaps products that might cause the budget to inch up or grow. As a lighting design firm that's involved in many prestigious projects with private and public clients, what has been the conversation with those clients about investing in these types of practices or products that support the well building initiative?
Well, I mean, for one thing I would say is like a lot of these things are just good design to meet these criteria for lighting. Some of them are just good design. They don't necessarily cost more, cost more expensive lighting equipment or anything like that. But I guess right now I think we're going to see more and more interest. Like I said, especially because we're coming out of the pandemic. There's so much interest in health and wellness in the workplace. But well is relatively new, and oftentimes the well projects are the first time that the client has ever encountered it, and so there's a learning curve. And I think that we're going to get through that more and more, and it's going to be much easier to design, well certified projects as the whole world gets more experience with it.
So as we've seen adoption of these standards inch forward and inch ahead and become more widely understood, there's still a long way to go. So in your opinion, what would need to happen for these types of practices to be even more adopted in projects in the future?
Well, I mean, obviously at the sort of macro level, building owners and corporate leaders need to feel that this is an important thing to do, to basically to have spaces for their employees or their patients or whatever that support health and wellness, or their students or whatever. And that they're willing to invest the time and money to achieve that. Time, maybe money, to achieve that. So WELL provides a framework to do that. And WELL is the only system that I know of that does that. Of course, the other benefit potentially is having WELL certification on your building, on your workplace, could be really good for attracting tenants if you're a landlord, or for attracting employees if you're an employer. Now, for designers and for the lighting people, for it to be more widely adopted, we need to show that designing a WELL project is can be a smooth process, that it's not an onerous thing, and everything goes right and they get their certification. The other thing I sort of want to point out when we're talking about, designing to WELL, is that everyone should look at the new version 2 of WELL, because if anybody's had any experience with WELL, the lighting portion of WELL before, and version 1, it's much improved with version 2. So kind of forget everything you know from any previous experience, look at version 2, and it's much easier to use. So it's going to make adoption of and certification of WELL projects much easier. The other thing that's really important when I'm talking about version 2 is that the lighting for circadian support precondition can be met with sufficient daylight. Whereas in version 1, you had to do so-called circadian light. You had to provide electric lighting that would provide lighting for circadian support. You don't have to do that now unless you have really poor daylight access in your space.
Excellent advice, especially your comments on the version 2 versus version 1 paradigm that people may have been in. So that's a good refresher for us to clean slate that understanding. And as you look forward in design and projects and adoption of this, and perhaps even version 3.0, et cetera, what types of technologies or practices that are emerging that relate to this WELL building standard? What are you most excited about in the future about this?
Well, I think that what happens with these standards, and we saw it happens with LEED, they sort of set sort of aspirational goals, and they sort of inspire market transformation. So we're already seeing that happen with WELL in our little lighting world. For example, WELL now uses for the glare metrics, uses either luminance or UGR. So we need, for example, manufacturers to publish luminance data and UGR data on their spec sheets, so we don't have to look it up and derive it and figure it out ourselves. And of course, I think we already know this from the circadian lighting work that's been done over the last few years. We need manufacturers to publish the MP ratios, the melanopic photopic ratios, so we can just plug that into our calculations and don't have to get, spectral power distribution and yada yada. The other thing that's interesting, there's now a flicker, it's pretty involved flicker criteria in WELL. I mean, that's a tough one because manufacturers would have to test according to these criteria. I'm not sure where that's going to go, but that's the kind of thing where WELL puts it out there and says, this is important, flicker's important, and let's see if we can figure out how to, meet these requirements. But the technology that I'm really interested in is what is sort of generically known as spectrally enhanced light sources that have a good MP ratio and a reasonable CCT. And I would encourage manufacturers to really look at making those sources options in their fixtures. What happened is industry got all caught up with tunable white as the technical solution to so-called circadian lighting. But the reality is you don't need tunable white system to provide circadian support. There are other ways to do it. The other thing I'm looking forward to, I think, is manufacturers developing more fixtures, for office and school applications that provide good vertical luminance at the eye without glare. And that's tricky, but we know it can be done, and that's going to really help us meet the circadian lighting, requirements in LEED if we decide to pursue that.
Glenn, always enjoy hearing your insights. I learned a lot in this short time, and we'll continue to learn a lot about the WELL building standard. We'll continue to share applause for your firm as you continue to win more and more awards for lighting design on some of the various projects and clients that you serve over your illustrious career and your firm's impressive client list and project list. So thank you so much for being a part of this discussion, and thank you for joining us today for 5 Big Questions.
All right, thank you.